She was dead. That's what he told himself every morning for 3 years. Every boardroom, every assassination order, every glass of whiskey swallowed alone at 2 a.m. in a penthouse that still smelled like her. Kang Seo-jun buried his wife in his mind because the alternative, that she was alive somewhere, breathing, choosing silence over him, was a wound he couldn't survive. Then 37,000 feet above the Pacific, a glass shattered, and the woman he'd spent 3 years mourning turned around. She was standing right there. If this story already has your heart, drop your city in the comments. Like this video so I know how far Seo-jun and Nia's story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happens next will destroy you. Bruh. The jet had cost $14 million, and it still felt like a cage. Kang Seo-jun sat in his rear cabin alone, the way he always sat, spine straight against Italian leather, jacket folded over the armrest with mechanical precision, a glass of single malt balanced on his knee that he hadn't touched in 40 minutes. Outside the oval windows, the Pacific stretched endlessly below a shelf of cloud. Somewhere down there was water cold enough to kill a man in minutes. He'd thought about that before. More than once. The cabin was divided into 3 sections. Up front, his 2 personal security leads, Baek Hyun-woo and a newer man, Park Jun-ho, sat with their shoulders rigid and their eyes forward, the way trained dogs wait. Middle section was empty. Seo-jun had ordered the 4 business associates who'd boarded with him in Hong Kong to take a connecting flight. He'd given no reason. He never did. The rear section was his. He preferred it that way. Had preferred it that way for 3 years, since the word alone stopped being a complaint and became a lifestyle, a discipline. Something you maintained like a scar, carefully, methodically, so it didn't tear back open. His phone lay face down on the tray table. 19 unread messages, 2 missed calls from his head of operations. Min Dae-soo, 1 from his attorney in Geneva. He hadn't read any of them. The jet had been airborne for 4 hours out of Hong Kong towards Seoul, and for the first time in recent memory, Seo-jun had simply decided not to be reachable. It wasn't peace. Peace was something other people had. This was numbness, and he had stopped pretending there was a difference. He was 41 years old. He controlled 11 legitimate companies and 4 that appeared nowhere in any public registry. He had a reputation in 7 countries that made certain kinds of men lower their eyes when he entered rooms. He had survived 2 assassination attempts, a hostile takeover that had stripped 3 rival families of their assets, and a war in Busan that had lasted 19 days and cost 11 lives on the other side. He had not survived losing Nia Brooks. She had been 28 when she disappeared. He'd been 38. They'd been married 14 months. 14 months was nothing, a footnote in a life built on leverage and violence, except that she had somehow, in those 14 months, become the only architecture holding the rest of it upright. He hadn't understood that until she was gone. He understood it now, completely. Every single morning, Seo-jun picked up the whiskey and finally drank, set the glass down with a soft click. Outside, the clouds thickened. The jet began a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor. Nothing serious, just the Pacific doing what the Pacific did. He had flown this route 40 times. He knew every rhythm of the air. He closed his eyes. Her face came immediately. It always did when he let his guard down. The particular way she tilted her head when she was annoyed with him. The sound of her laugh. Genuine, unguarded. The kind she couldn't perform even when she tried. The way she argued back. God, the way she argued. Most people in Seo-jun's life spoke to him with careful, curated deference, choosing every syllable the way you navigate a minefield. Nia had walked straight through every minefield he put in front of her and come out the other side telling him exactly what she thought. He had found it maddening, then extraordinary, then necessary. He'd had her investigated before the first date. Of course he had. Standard protocol. He didn't let anyone close without knowing their full architecture. Nia Brooks, 26 at the time, Chicago-born, moved to Seoul for a position at an international trade consultancy. Clean record. Sharp academic background. No connections to any of the organizations he'd spent his career either working with or destroying. What the investigation hadn't captured, what no surveillance photo or financial trace ever could, was the quality of her attention, the way she actually listened. Not the performed listening of people who wanted something from him, but the real kind, where she absorbed what he said and turned it back at him from angles he hadn't considered. She had made him feel, for the first time in a long time, like a person rather than a position. He had been, in retrospect, completely unprepared for her. They'd married after 7 months. His mother had said it was too fast. His consigliere, the old man Choi Won-chik, had said nothing, which meant the same thing. Seo-jun had told them both that he appreciated their concern and done it anyway. 14 months later, she was gone. No note, no call, no trace of struggle or coercion, which had initially made his people assume the worst, that she'd simply chosen to leave. That theory had lasted approximately 6 hours before Seo-jun had shut it down with a ferocity that scared even Baek Hyun-woo, who had seen Seo-jun shoot a man in the knee without changing his expression. She didn't leave. She wouldn't leave without telling him. Whatever else was true, he knew that. He'd spent the first 6 months certain she'd been taken. He'd torn through every rival organization, every thread of hostility, every name on the long list of people who had reason to want leverage over him. Nothing. The second 6 months, he'd expanded the search internationally. Europe, Southeast Asia, the Americas. He'd hired private firms. He'd called in favors from people who owed him the kind of favors you don't forget. Still nothing. Year 2. Year 3. Gradually, the certainty eroded. Not the grief was structural, load-bearing, a permanent feature of his interior, but the certainty. He still searched. He still had Dae-soo run monthly trace protocols on every known alias and biometric they had for her. But he had stopped waking up each morning with the conviction that today would be the day. He had not told anyone this. He had not admitted it even to himself in words. But it was true, and on some level he knew it, the way you know a room has grown dark without looking up. The turbulence returned, sharper this time. The jet dropped 2 or 3 feet and then caught itself. That stomach lurch sensation that jolts even experienced flyers. Seo-jun didn't reach for the armrests. He simply rode it, glass stabilized under his palm, eyes still closed. Then he heard the sound, glass breaking. Not shattering spectacularly, but that distinct, clean crack of crystal hitting aircraft floor, followed immediately by a quick inhale, a soft, sharp sound from someone who'd been startled and was already apologizing internally before the words came out. He opened his eyes. The curtain separating the rear cabin from the middle section had been drawn back. He hadn't authorized that. He turned his head with the slow, controlled deliberateness of a man who does not permit surprise to register on his face. A flight attendant stood at the dividing point between cabins, crouched slightly toward the broken glass at her feet, one hand braced on the seat back for balance, her head beginning to rise. She was in the standard uniform of the private charter service, dark navy, hair pulled back cleanly. Her shoulders were tensed with the specific miserable tension of someone who has just made a mistake in front of someone they're afraid of. She looked up. Kang Seo-jun stopped breathing. The world did not slow down. That was the thing about real shock. It didn't slow anything. It did the opposite. It compressed everything into a single brutal instant of clarity where every detail struck simultaneously and without mercy. The angle of her cheekbones, the precise shade of brown skin he had memorized across 14 months of mornings, of arguments, of silences that were comfortable and silences that weren't, the shape of her mouth, the eyes, dark, wide, always slightly more guarded than the rest of her face. Always the last part of her to commit to an expression. Those eyes now showed something he had never, in all the time he had known her, seen in them before. Pure, naked terror. Seo-jun, his name in her voice. 3 years, and it still fit in his chest like a key in a lock. He stood without knowing he'd stood. The whiskey glass hit the carpet, and he didn't hear it. Nia. One word. One syllable. He hadn't said her name out loud in 4 months because the last time he had, alone in his study at 3 a.m. with a mission report in his hands, he'd had to sit with his head down against the desk for 10 minutes afterward. She straightened. She took a step back. Her face, and this was the thing he was going to replay in his mind for the rest of the night, and possibly the rest of his life. Her face was a war. Relief and terror, and something that looked like devastation, all fighting for the same real estate simultaneously. I can explain. Don't. His voice came out lower than he intended, quieter, more controlled than he felt. Don't say that yet. From the forward cabin, Baek Hyun-woo was already moving. He'd heard Nia's voice and he was on his feet, hand moving toward his jacket, body memory overriding everything. Seo-jun held up one hand without looking away from Nia. "Stand down." A pause. Then Hyun-woo's footsteps stopped. Seo-jun looked at his wife. His dead wife. His missing wife. The woman whose face had lived behind his sternum like a splinter for 3 years, working deeper with every month that passed without an answer. She was here. She was standing in front of him in a flight attendant's uniform with broken crystal at her feet, and she was trembling, barely, the way she always trembled when she was afraid and didn't want to admit it. The tremor so subtle it lived only in her hands and in the set of her jaw. "You're working a charter flight," he said. "Yes." "Under what name?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm what he already suspected. "Park Ji-yeon." "How long?" 8 months on this route. And before that, she said nothing, which was an answer. Seo-jun turned away from her. He walked to the window. Outside, the cloud cover had thickened to a solid gray mass, erasing the ocean completely. He put one hand flat on the cold glass and looked at nothing. He was shaking. He could feel it happening in his chest and his jaw and down through his arms, this deep structural tremor he hadn't experienced since he couldn't remember when. Years. He had spent 3 years constructing a version of himself that did not shake. He had built that version carefully, out of discipline and routine and the systematic removal of anything that could reach him. And she had walked through the curtain and dismantled it in approximately 6 seconds. He turned back. "Clear the aircraft," he said. Not to her. To the air, trusting that Hyun-woo was listening. "I want the pilots notified that we have a schedule adjustment. Tell the forward crew to stay in the cockpit. Have Junho take a position at the front curtain and hold it." "Sir." Hyun-woo's voice from the front. "Now, Hyun-woo." Footsteps. Voices. Quiet. Efficient. The organized withdrawal of trained men who knew when their boss needed a room emptied. The jet's interior sound shifted as the forward section was cleared and the partition was drawn. Seo-jun looked at Nia. She hadn't moved. She was still standing with the broken glass at her feet and her hands at her sides, and that expression on her face, the devastated, terrified, relieved expression of someone who has been caught doing something that was never supposed to be caught. He gestured at the seat across from where he'd been sitting. "Sit down." "Seo-jun, sit. Down." Not a shout, not even raised. But there was something in the pitch of it, some bottom register that he reserved for rooms where things were about to become irrevocable. She heard it. She moved to the seat and sat. He sat across from her. He looked at her. He made himself look, really look, the way he had forbidden himself to look at photographs for the last 8 months because the photographs had started to feel like a form of torture he was administering to himself. She was thinner than he remembered. Not dramatically, but visibly. There was a leanness to her face that hadn't been there before, a sharpness along the jaw. She was 31 now. The math came to him involuntarily. 28 when she left, 31 now. 3 years of her face, her life, her sleep and her meals and her daily existence. All of it had happened in rooms he had no access to, and the knowledge of that was a specific kind of pain he didn't have language for. "You've been afraid of me this whole time," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at her hands. "Not of you." "Then what?" She looked up. Her eyes were wet. She was not going to cry. He knew her well enough to know she would hold it, had always held it, hated crying in front of people, even people she trusted. But the moisture was there, a hairline fracture in the control she was maintaining. "Of what finding me would do to you," she said. "Of what they would do to both of us once they knew." "Who is they, Nia?" The name came out differently that time. Not the controlled syllable of recognition from before, but the full weight of 3 years of everything he hadn't said into the empty rooms of his life. She heard it. Something in her face shifted, the armor cracking at an edge. "I found something," she said. Her voice was flat, deliberate, the tone of someone who has been through a version of this conversation so many times in their own mind that they've worn the emotion out of it. "About 3 weeks before I disappeared. I wasn't supposed to find it. I wasn't looking for anything, Shaun. I was reviewing some of the subsidiary documentation because you'd asked me to flag anything that looked inconsistent in the Macau filings. And I found a transfer. Seojun didn't move. What kind of transfer? The kind that goes through 4 shell structures and ends in an account that has no official relationship to any of your entities. She paused. Except that it did. I could see it in the architecture. Whoever built the structure knew your systems. Not an outsider, not a rival. Someone on the inside. Who? I didn't know yet, that first day. I started tracing it. Her jaw tightened. I traced it for 2 weeks. I was careful. I used the access you'd given me for the legitimate consulting work. I didn't touch anything flagged. I built the picture slowly, and then she stopped. And then I went to your private server archive to verify one more document. And when I closed the connection, I realized it had pinged. Someone had set an alert on that specific file path. Someone who knew enough about your systems to build a passive monitor no one else knew existed. She looked at him. Within 6 hours, I had 2 men following me. The aircraft trembled again. Another wave of turbulence, sustained this time, rattling the overhead panels before smoothing out. Neither of them moved. You could have come to me, Seojun said. The words were measured. He was keeping the anger on a very short leash, and she could probably see that. I thought about it. For 2 days I thought about it. She didn't flinch from his gaze. And then I thought about what would happen if I was wrong. If I came to you with an accusation, and it turned out the person I suspected was someone you trusted completely, someone who had time and access and reasons to make my accusation look like paranoia. She paused. I would have been discredited, and then I would have disappeared anyway, except not in a way you could find me. You didn't trust me to protect you. I trusted you with my life, she said. Fast, flat. The kind of sentence that's been rehearsed and still hurts to say. I didn't trust your organization, and there is a difference, Seojun, whether you want to hear that or not. He stood up again. He needed to move. He walked 4 steps toward the window, turned, walked 4 steps back. Old habit. When his thoughts crowded him, when the room got too small, he needed the sensation of locomotion. It never helped. He kept doing it anyway. 3 years, he said to the carpet. I know. You were 3 years in hiding, working charter flights, fake name, building a life in pieces, and you never... He stopped. He reset. How many times did you know where I was? A long pause. Seojun, how many times? She closed her eyes. I kept track of your travel schedule. I had a contact. She stopped herself. Changed direction. I wanted to know you were safe. That was all I could. It was all I could do. From where I was, I couldn't come closer. Every month I told myself when it was safe, when I had enough to bring you, and then something shifted and the window closed, and you watched me from a distance for 3 years. He turned around. There was something in his face now that he hadn't let her see yet. Not just the anger, which was there and was real, but the rawness underneath it. While I had investigators turning over every country in Asia, He stopped, looked at the floor. When he looked back up, his jaw was set hard. I thought you were dead, Nia. For 2 years I kept myself from concluding it. And then I ran out of wall to push against and I started to conclude it. She was crying now, quietly. She always cried quietly, like she was apologizing for it, tears tracking down her face while her expression stayed almost controlled. I'm sorry. Don't. He sat back down. Not across from her. Beside her, the two of them facing the oval window and the gray nothing outside it. Not touching. Just proximate, in the way that two people who have been orbiting each other for years settle into without planning it. Don't apologize. Not yet. You still haven't told me who. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a breath. I have documentation. Where? Secured server. Access code only I know. She hesitated. I've been building it. For 3 years I've been building it. Every time I had a lead or could verify another connection. It's thorough, Seojun. It's thorough enough to take to a court or use it the other way. The other way. He understood what that meant. Tell me the name. She turned to look at him for the first time since they'd sat down side by side. This close, He could see exactly how tired she was. The kind of exhaustion that goes bone deep, that accumulates across years of sleeping in unfamiliar places and waking up afraid. He had put that exhaustion on her face, not intentionally, not knowingly, but the architecture of his life had produced it. She held his gaze. She said the name. And Kang Seo-jun's entire empire shifted on its foundation, because the name, she said, was one of the 6 people in the world who had full, unrestricted access to every operation he ran, every server he owned, and every room he slept in. He sat with it for a moment. Just sat with it, the way you sit with a diagnosis. Then his phone lit up on the tray table beside him. He leaned over without thinking and read the notification from Dae-soo, a protocol alert, the kind that meant a security system had tripped somewhere in the monitoring network. The message read, "Facial recognition triggered. Seoul Central Node. Someone ran her biometrics 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes ago. While they were still airborne. While she was standing in front of him with broken glass at her feet. Seo-jun looked at Nia. She had seen the notification on his face before he said anything. Her jaw was tight again. The brief window of something almost like relief that had opened in her expression was already closing. "They know," she said. Not a question. He was already reaching for the partition. "Hyun-woo." His voice was steady, completely steady. 3 years of discipline producing exactly the thing it had been built to produce. "Change of protocol. We land in 40 minutes. I want a full extraction team at the private terminal. I want the estate on lockdown before wheels down. And I want Dae-soo on a secure line in the next 3 minutes. A beat, then, understood. He turned back to Nia. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized from 14 months of marriage. The expression of someone trying to read whether he was okay and deciding not to ask because the answer mattered too much. "You're taking me back," she said. "Yes." "That's going to bring everything." "Yes," he said again. "I know what it's going to bring." He looked at her. "I've spent 3 years with nothing to protect. That problem is over." Outside the window, Seoul was still hours away. Below the cloud cover, the Pacific moved in patterns no one could predict. And somewhere in the city they were flying toward, a man who had eaten at Seo-jun's table and spoken at Seo-jun's meetings and stood inside the perimeter of everything Seo-jun had built. That man's phone was lighting up right now with a 3-year-old problem that had just resurrected itself 37,000 feet above the ocean. He didn't know what was waiting for him on the ground yet. He was about to. Nia sat beside him. 3 years of distance collapsed into a cabin the size of a living room and said nothing. The silence between them was complicated in the way that only silence between people with history can be. It carried everything at once, the grief and the fury and the relief and the thing underneath all of it that neither of them had said yet because it was too large for the moment. Too dangerous to name while the aircraft was still moving and the world outside was already beginning to close in. His hand was on the armrest between them. Her hand was 6 inches from his. He didn't close the distance. She didn't move. But they were in the same room. After 3 years, they were in the same room. And the man who had just learned his most trusted ally was a traitor, and his wife was alive, was having significant difficulty determining which of those facts was going to destroy him first. The jet banked toward Seoul, and in the secured operations center of a glass tower in Gangnam, a man who had spent 3 years believing he was safe received an alert that changed everything, and reached, with a hand that did not shake, for his phone. The private terminal at Gimpo was not the public face of Korean aviation. There were no departure boards here, no families dragging luggage through sliding doors, no smell of convenience store coffee and recycled air. The private terminal was a sealed building accessed through a separate gate off the main expressway, monitored by cameras that fed into Seo-jun's own security network rather than any government system, staffed by people who had been vetted and re-vetted and who understood that the first requirement of their employment was the systematic absence of memory. The jet touched down at 11:47 p.m. By the time the wheels stopped rolling, there were 4 vehicles on the tarmac, 2 black SUVs, 1 decoy sedan, and a support vehicle carrying 4 additional men from Seo-jun's personal security detail. Baek Hyun-woo had coordinated the extraction from the air, 40 minutes of encrypted calls that Seo-jun had monitored without participating in, sitting in the rear cabin with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, while Nia sat across from him and said nothing. They hadn't spoken again after the aircraft banked. There was too much to say, and none of it was the right thing for a pressurized cabin 40 minutes from landing with armed men in the front section and an enemy already moving on the ground. The door opened. Cold air hit first. Seoul in autumn, sharp and mineral, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothing. Hyun-woo descended the stairs first, swept the perimeter with his eyes, then came back up 2 steps and gave the signal. Seo-jun stood. He looked at Nia. She was gripping the armrest. Just slightly, knuckles barely registering the pressure, the tell she'd always had when she was holding herself together through an act of will. She released it when she saw him looking. "Close to me," he said. She nodded once. They came down the stairs together, and she was within 18 inches of him the entire way to the vehicle. Not touching, but close enough that any shooter targeting her would have had a serious problem separating the geometry. He'd taught her that once, early in their marriage, half as a lesson and half because she'd asked. She'd remembered. The convoy moved. Min Dae-soo was waiting at the estate. Seo-jun's compound sat in the hills north of the city, not the glass and steel showpiece that most people associated with his legitimate business profile, but the real residence, the one that didn't appear in any architecture magazine or social register. 12 acres behind a perimeter wall that had been reinforced twice in the past 4 years. Guard rotations every 90 minutes, motion sensors covering the tree line. Dae-soo was standing in the main entrance hall when they came through the door, and the expression on his face when he saw Nia was something Seo-jun filed away to examine later. Not shock, exactly. Something more complicated. A man trying to arrange several things happening simultaneously in his mind before any of them reached his face. "Director Kang," Dae-soo said. His eyes moved to Nia. "Ma'am." "Where are we?" Seo-jun said. "Lockdown is active. Perimeter doubled as of 2200 hours. The alert that triggered on the Seoul node, I've been running it back." Dae-soo paused. "It came from inside the network." A beat of silence. "Inside," Seo-jun repeated. The query that flagged her biometrics. It originated from a terminal with level 3 clearance. Someone who already had access. Dae-soo's jaw was tight. "I've narrowed the terminal location, but I haven't identified the user yet. Whoever ran it knew how to route through secondary authentication." Seo-jun looked at Nia briefly. She was standing slightly behind his shoulder, taking in the hall, looking at the staff. 2 of them visible, both people who'd been with the household for years. One of them, an older woman named Mrs. Seo, who had managed the domestic staff since before Seo-jun moved in, had stopped completely still in the corridor and was staring at Nia with an expression that was entirely unguarded. Wet eyes, both hands pressed flat against her thighs. Nia looked at her. Something moved in Nia's face. She didn't say anything. "Get her situated," Seo-jun said to Dae-soo, meaning Mrs. Seo. "Give the woman a moment. Don't let her stand in the corridor falling apart." Then to Nia. "I need an hour." Nia looked at him. "I want to be in the room when you— 1 hour. His voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. "I need to understand what we're working with before I put you in the same room as those conversations. Trust me this much." She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then, 1 hour. She turned to follow Mrs. Seo, who had composed herself and was now moving toward the east wing with the particular quiet efficiency of a woman performing the most meaningful task she'd had in 3 years. Seo-jun watched them go. Then he walked into the operations room off the main corridor. The operations room had no windows. It had 4 monitors, a secure line, a whiteboard that was always covered in a cipher only 3 people could read, and a table that had never once been used for anything as mundane as a meal. Dae-soo followed him in and pulled the door. "The name she gave you," Dae-soo said. Seo-jun looked at him. "You know what name?" "I don't, I'm asking." A long moment. Seo-jun's eyes ran over Dae-soo's face the way a man reads terrain, looking for hidden elevation, places where the ground might give. He and Dae-soo had worked together for 9 years. 9 years was a long time. Long enough to build real trust, or long enough to build a very convincing performance of it. He said the name. Dae-soo's reaction was immediate and physical. A short exhale, a slight stiffening through the neck and shoulders, the involuntary physical response of someone receiving a blow they weren't fully prepared for, even if they'd considered the possibility. "Choi Won-chik." Yes. You're certain she has documentation, 3 years of it. Seojun sat down in the chair at the head of the table. He didn't lean back. He planted his forearms and looked at the nearest monitor, which was showing the perimeter camera feeds in a grid of 6. The grounds were dark and still. The Macau transfers she found 3 years ago. They trace back to a structure Wanchik built. She has the architecture. She has records of 4 subsequent transfers, 2 of which happened after she disappeared, which means it didn't stop when the threat was removed. Whatever he was moving, he kept moving it. But by skin, Dae-soo was quiet for a moment. How much? She doesn't have the full number yet. Enough to know it's not operational expenses. Wanchik has been in the organization for 22 years. Seojun's voice was flat. I know exactly how long. He was my father's man before he was mine. He sat at my father's right hand when I was still learning how to run the South Side operations. He paused. That's why he knew every system, because he built half of them. The room was very quiet. Where is he now? Seojun said. Dae-soo pulled out his own phone, checked something. Officially, Busan. He told your secretary he was attending the Lim family meetings through the weekend. And unofficially, I don't have eyes on him past 1800 hours. Seojun nodded, slow, deliberate. The nod of a man who is performing calm because the alternative is counterproductive. Find him. Don't approach. Don't contact. Don't let him know we're looking. I want a location within 2 hours. Understood. Dae-soo moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back. Seojun. First name? They use first names only in rooms with no one else in them. What she did, disappearing instead of coming to you. He paused carefully. She wasn't wrong that it could have gone badly. If Wanchik had enough access to build a passive monitor into your server architecture, he had enough access to manage your response to an accusation. I know that. I know, Dae-soo. He looked at the monitors. It doesn't change what it cost. Dae-soo left. Seojun sat alone in the operations room for a while and looked at the camera feeds. He was looking at nothing in particular, letting his eyes move across the dark grounds while his mind worked at the problem the way it always worked. Not linearly, but in multiple directions simultaneously, pulling threads, checking tensions, looking for the place where the structure was weakest. Wanchik, 22 years. Every major decision, every succession crisis, every internal dispute that had threatened to fracture the organization. Wanchik had been in the room, had been the voice of measured counsel, the steadying hand, the man who said wait when others said strike, and strike when others said wait. Seojun had trusted that voice, had relied on it, especially in the first years after his father's death when the organization was unstable and the other families were circling, had trusted it, apparently, while Wanchik was running a secondary operation through shells Seojun couldn't see. He thought about the specific nature of the betrayal, not the money, which was a symptom, but the architecture of it, the passive monitor on the server. That was patience. That was someone who had set a trap and then waited, possibly for years, for someone to trip it. Nia had tripped it, and Wanchik's response had been to have her followed within hours, but not killed. That was the part that snagged. 3 years and Nia was still alive. That meant either Wanchik had wanted her to stay hidden, as leverage, as a loose thread he could manage, or he hadn't known where she was either. Both possibilities had implications. He stood up. He needed to hear the rest of what she knew. He found her in the East Wing sitting room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Dark now, the city lights visible in the distance through the trees. She'd changed out of the uniform into clothes that Mrs. Seo must have found somewhere. Civilian clothes, a dark sweater and trousers that fit almost right, close enough. She was sitting with a glass of water on the table beside her that she hadn't touched. She looked up when he came in. He sat across from her. No table between them this time. Just 2 chairs angled toward the window, the way they'd sometimes sat late at night in this same wing when they were married, and the city was quiet and neither of them wanted to go to sleep yet. Documentation, he said. Tell me exactly what you have. She told him. It took 40 minutes. She was precise. That had always been true. The quality of her attention to structure and detail, the thing that had made her genuinely useful in the legitimate consulting work, and that had ultimately made her dangerous. She laid it out in sequence. The initial transfer she'd found in the Macau filings, the 2 weeks of careful tracing, the moment she realized she'd triggered the monitor. Then the 6 weeks after, moving constantly, burning through cash, establishing the first alias. The decision to keep building the case rather than simply survive, because she'd understood instinctively that survival without resolution meant living as Park Ji-yeon forever. The transfers aggregate to approximately 47 million over the 4-year period I can document, she said. The destination structure terminates in 2 accounts, one in Liechtenstein, one in Singapore. I have the account architecture, but not the beneficial owner. Whoever is on the other end of those transfers covered their tracks better than one sheik did. Which means there's a second party, at minimum. She looked at him. One sheik wasn't moving that money for himself. The structure's too clean on the receiving end. That's professional. Someone who does this for a living built that terminus. He was selling information. Not a question. Seo-jun had reached this conclusion already, somewhere on the tarmac at Gimpo, but hearing it out loud made it different. That's what it looks like. The timing of the transfers correlates. I checked it against your operational calendar for the periods I could access. 3 of the transfers happened within 48 hours of major decisions that were discussed in closed leadership meetings. The room was very quiet. He was feeding someone, Seo-jun said. For at least 4 years. Yes. And when you found the thread, he moved to contain it. Within hours. Seo-jun was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the garden was dark. A security patrol moved through the frame. 2 men, measured pace, the amber glow of their earpieces visible for a moment before they passed out of view. Why didn't he find you? Seo-jun said. 3 years. He had resources. If he was motivated enough to have you followed within 6 hours of a server alert. I think he tried. She said it without inflection. In the first year, I moved 11 times. There were 2 instances where I was convinced I'd been located. I burned everything and rebuilt. After that, it was quieter. She paused. I think at some point he made a calculation. Finding me required resources and created risk. As long as I stayed hidden and you stayed convinced I was dead or gone, I wasn't a threat. The moment I surfaced, that was the moment I became one again. The biometric alert. He knows I'm back now, which means... Her phone buzzed on the table. Not her phone. The secure handset Seo-jun's people had issued her in the vehicle from the terminal. She looked at it. Unknown number. She looked up at Seo-jun. He leaned forward and answered it on speaker. 3 seconds of silence. Then a voice. Male. Unhurried. The cadence of a man who speaks slowly because he knows his words carry weight. A voice Seo-jun had known for 22 years. A voice that had spoken at his father's funeral. I expected the call to be from you, Seo-jun, one sheik said. Not this. A pause. So she answered. That tells me something. Seo-jun's hands were flat on his thighs. Where are you? Somewhere comfortable. One chick's voice was exactly as Seo-jun remembered. Measured, precise, the tone of a man giving advice rather than making a threat. The same tone he'd used in 2 decades of strategy sessions. I want you to understand that what happened 3 years ago was not personal. That matters to me. Does it? The woman had access to something she shouldn't have found. I reacted proportionally. She was never in physical danger from my people. I gave specific instructions to that effect. The goal was to make her circumstances uncomfortable enough that she would choose to leave permanently. The fact that she survived in adequate health for 3 years suggests the strategy was effective, if imperfect. You drove my wife into hiding for 3 years, and you want me to receive that as a proportional response. I want you to receive it as context. A brief pause. Seo-jun, we have been in the same organization for 22 years. You were 20 years old when I started working for your father. I have made decisions in that time that you are not aware of. Decisions that cost me, personally, in ways you cannot fully account for. I am not asking for gratitude. I am asking for a conversation before you do something that cannot be undone. You have 30 seconds to tell me who you were selling information to. A silence. That's not a conversation, one sheik said. That's an ultimatum. 20 seconds. Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence, Seo-jun heard something that he had not expected. The sound of Wanchik exhaling slowly, the exhale of a man who has made a decision and is letting the last alternative go. His name, Wanchik said, is Han Jung-soo. He is not someone you know, but he is someone who has been building toward your organization for 6 years, and what he has built is considerably larger than anything I could have stopped alone. Another pause. I was not selling you, Seo-jun. I was managing a problem that, if it had reached you unmanaged, would have ended everything your father built before you had time to respond. Whether you believe that or not is your decision. But before you declare war on me, you should understand that Han Jung-soo has been waiting for exactly this moment. A split in your organization is the only way he gets the opening he needs. The line went dead. Seo-jun sat with the silent handset for 3 seconds. Then he set it down on the table with a gentleness that was somehow more controlled than throwing it would have been. Nia was looking at him. Her face had gone very still. You believed some of that, she said. He looked at her. He didn't confirm or deny it, which was itself a confirmation. How much of your documentation covers a name, Han Jung-soo? She was already shaking her head. None. That name isn't in anything I built. Then either Wanchik invented him, or he exists and he's been even more careful than Wanchik. She leaned forward. Seo-jun, if Wanchik is telling the truth, if there's a third party, someone external who's been building toward you for 6 years, then the biometric alert tonight wasn't just Wanchik learning I was back. It was whoever is watching Wanchik learning it too. The operations room door opened down the corridor. Dae-soo's voice. Seo-jun, clipped. The syllables carrying the specific weight of a man who has found something he didn't want to find. You need to come see this. Seo-jun stood. Nia stood too. Stay here, he said. No. Flat. No uncertainty in it. No negotiation. 3 years of living alone had apparently finished off whatever remained of her willingness to wait in rooms. No, whatever it is, I'm not sitting in this chair while you… Nia. I've been sitting somewhere safe for 3 years while things happened around me. Her voice cracked once, just at the edge of it, then held. I am not doing that again. Whatever is happening, I am in the room. He looked at her for a long moment, at the set of her jaw, at the exhaustion that hadn't left her eyes and wasn't going to leave them tonight. He turned and walked toward the operations room. She followed 2 steps behind. The monitor Dae-soo was pointing at showed a satellite image. An overhead view of the compound perimeter, infrared rendering, the heat signatures of the guard patrol visible as pale orange shapes moving their routes. At the edge of the frame, just beyond the tree line on the northeast boundary, there was a cluster of heat signatures that were not his people. They were not moving. They had settled into positions that, to anyone who had looked at military-grade infrared long enough, looked exactly like what they were. 12, maybe 14 waiting. When? Seo-jun said. First signature appeared 18 minutes ago, Dae-soo said. They're not moving yet. They're holding position at 200 meters from the perimeter. They're waiting for an order, Seo-jun said. Or a window. Dae-soo looked at him. If they wanted to go now, they'd have gone. They're holding for a reason. Seo-jun looked at the screen. At the 14 pale orange shapes in the tree line, patient and still and precisely positioned in the dark outside his… Seo-jun's voice came out at precisely the register he used when the calculation was already done, and the only remaining question was execution. Pull the patrol in from the northeast quadrant. Don't signal it. Rotate them naturally. Same interval, different return path. I don't want whoever is watching that tree line to know we've seen them. Dae-soo was already on the radio, low and clipped. Seo-jun looked at the infrared screen for another 4 seconds. 14 signatures. Settled positions. The specific stillness of trained men who had been told to wait, and who were comfortable waiting. That comfort was information. These were not people improvising. They had a timeline, and they were on it, and the timeline had not yet told them to move, which meant there was still a window. Hyun-woo! Seo-jun turned to where his security lead was standing at the door. I want Nia moved to the sub-level room, not the guest level. The sub-level. Reinforced door, internal camera access, no windows. I told you I wasn't… Nia started. You told me you weren't sitting in a chair waiting. He turned to look at her directly. The sub-level room has 4 monitors and a direct line into this feed. You will see everything I see in real time. You will not be waiting. You will be watching. He held her gaze. But you will not be standing in a room with exterior walls while 14 armed men are in my tree line. That is not a negotiation. She looked at him, at the screen, back at him. The calculation moving across her face, not capitulation, but a woman doing the math and arriving at the same answer. I want a handset with a live channel to this room. Done. She left with Hyunwoo. Seo-jun watched the door close and then turned back to the monitors and let himself have approximately 3 seconds of something that was almost like relief before he shut it down and went back to work. The call from Won-chik, he said to Dae-soo. He knew she'd answered. He expected me to call from a different line, which means he expected me to be calling from this room, on a secured channel, the way I always handle things. He knows our protocols. He built our protocols, Dae-soo said quietly. Yes. Seo-jun looked at the northeast tree line on the screen. The 14 shapes had not moved. He also told me a name, Han Jung-soo, 6 years building toward this organization. He paused. Run it. I've been running it since you said it in the other room. Dae-soo glanced at his secondary monitor. I have a Han Jung-soo registered as the beneficial owner of 3 logistics companies. 2 in Incheon, 1 registered in Osaka. No criminal record in any database I can access from here. No known organizational affiliations. He paused. But the Incheon companies, 2 of them share a legal representation firm with a holding structure that your father's organization had a dispute with in 2009. Seo-jun went still. Which dispute? The Incheon port rights, the family your father pushed out when he consolidated the northern coastal operations. Dae-soo's voice was carefully neutral. The family's name was Han. The room was very quiet. 6 years, Seo-jun said. If Han Jung-soo is a son or nephew, someone who was old enough in 2009 to understand what the consolidation meant, 6 years of preparation isn't excessive. It's patient. Seo-jun thought about what Won-chik had said on the phone. I was managing a problem that would have ended everything your father built. He had heard it at the time as self-justification, the story a traitor tells to make himself the protagonist. But if Han Jung-soo was a Han, if the Incheon family had spent 15 years building a position from which to dismantle the Kang organization from the inside, Won-chik wasn't selling information, Seo-jun said. It came out slowly, each word tested before it landed. He was feeding Han Jung-soo controlled information, things that looked valuable but were managed, keeping a threat contained by appearing to cooperate with it. Dae-soo said nothing, which meant he'd reached the same conclusion and was waiting to see if Seo-jun would arrive there himself. And Nia finding the transfers exposed the operation, not because she found evidence of Won-chik's betrayal, but because she found evidence of the control mechanism, the thing Won-chik had spent years keeping invisible. Seo-jun's jaw tightened, and Won-chik couldn't explain it to me without exposing the entire structure and trusting me to believe that his judgment, to manage a 15-year revenge plot in secret rather than bring it to me, was correct. So he silenced the only person who had seen the thread, Dae-soo said. He tried to. Seo-jun turned from the screen. And now that thread is resurfaced, Han Jung-soo knows the controlled leak is compromised, Won-chik's position is exposed, and someone in that tree line is waiting for a signal to... The lights went out. Not gradually, all at once, every light in the compound dropping to complete black in a single instant, the monitors dying with them, the hum of the operations room equipment cutting to silence. Emergency protocol kicked in 4 seconds later. Dim red emergency lighting coming up from floor strips, the monitors rebooting on backup power, the secured radio on Dae-soo's belt crackling with rapid voices. Perimeter breach, one of the guards' voices said through the radio, tight and clipped. Northeast section. They cut the primary grid. Dae-soo was already at the backup console. The monitors came back. Degraded resolution, backup feed, but the infrared was still live, and the 14 shapes in the tree line were no longer holding position. They were moving. How long to the perimeter wall at that pace? Seo-jun said. 4 minutes, maybe less. Get every man on the northeast side, pull the west and south rotations. I want a concentrated defense, not a spread. They chose that entry point for a reason, which means they've assessed the others as secondary. He was already moving toward the door. Where's my weapon? Seojun? Where? Desu opened the bottom drawer of the console without further argument and placed a Glock on the surface. Seojun picked it up, checked it with the automatic fluency of old muscle memory, and chambered it without looking down. His handset buzzed. Nia's channel. He answered it while moving into the corridor. I can see them on the feed, she said. Her voice was controlled, not quite steady, controlled. There are more at the south side. The infrared is showing. Seojun, there are more at the south. 6, maybe 7. They're not moving yet, but they're there. He stopped moving. He turned back to the door of the operations room. Daesu was already looking at the south sector feed on the rebooted monitors. His face in the red emergency lighting showed the expression of a man recalculating. She's right. 6 on the south. They were outside the original frame. They held farther back, which is why they didn't show on the first pass. 20 men. Possibly more. This was not a pressure tactic. This was not a demonstration of capability or a move to create leverage at a negotiating table. 20 men on 2 sides of a compound did not come to negotiate. They came to clear. Seojun pressed the handset. The documentation. Your secured server. Can you access it remotely? Yes. How long to pull the core files? A pause. 7 minutes if the connection is stable. But Seojun, pull them. Start pulling them now. Push everything to the emergency archive I set up in the Hong Kong server. The address is in the secured notes your handset has access to. I know the address. A beat. I've known about that server for 2 years. He didn't respond to that. Now was not the time. 7 minutes. Go. He put the handset in his jacket and moved. The corridor outside the operations room was dim red and silent. The household staff had been moved to the interior safe rooms by Mrs. Seo at the first sign of lockdown, which was protocol they'd drilled enough times that it happened automatically. Hyunwoo appeared from the east corridor junction, weapon drawn, moving with the economic speed of a man who has done this in real conditions before. Sir, the breach team is hitting the northeast wall now. Garcia and the 4-man at the gatehouse are holding the entry point, but they won't hold it for an explosion. Not close. Somewhere to the northeast. The direction of the main security gate. A concussive thump that they felt in the floor before they heard it, followed immediately by the crackling percussion of automatic weapons fire. Not a few shots. Sustained. Multiple weapons, multiple positions. The sound of something that had been building to this for a long time and had finally decided to stop waiting. Gatehouse is gone, someone said through the radio. Not afraid, just reporting. The flat voice of a man doing the math in real time. Hyunwoo looked at Seojun. We cannot hold the grounds with the personnel we have against that volume. I know. Seojun was already thinking 3 moves ahead, which was the only way he knew how to think. We don't hold the grounds. We consolidate. Every man pulls to the interior defensive positions, the main building, the reinforced sections. We give them the perimeter. If we give them the perimeter, we give them space they have to cover and time they have to spend. And we use that time. He looked at Hyunwoo. The sublevel. How many men do you have between that room and the exterior? Currently 3 on the stairwell. Pull 2 more from the west corridor. She does not move from that room until I say. He moved fast toward the main hall, Hyunwoo behind him. The sound of weapons fire was closer now. North side, the ground level, the guards at the interior line making their stand. Through the tall windows of the main corridor, Seojun could see lights moving in the garden. Tactical flashlights, multiple sources, moving in the coordinated pattern of a sweep team. They were already inside the wall. Seojun pressed himself to the wall beside the window and watched the flashlight pattern for 4 seconds. 3 teams, he counted, moving in a pincer toward the main building's east entrance. They knew the layout. That knowledge, the specific knowledge of where the east entrance was, which approach was quickest, was not information available on any floor plan. It was information from someone who had been inside this building. His radio crackled, a voice he almost didn't recognize at first. Not one of his guards. Different cadence, different frequency, bleeding through the secured channel in a way that should have been technically impossible. Seojun, Won Shik's voice, through the radio, on the secured frequency that only Seojun's people should have been able to access. Call your men back. If they stop engaging, Han Jung-soo's team will hold position. I have a 30-minute window to get you and the woman out of the building through the service tunnel before the south team closes the secondary exit. Seo-jun stared at the radio for 2 full seconds. He's on our frequency. Dae-soo's voice came through, tight with something that was almost disbelief. He's been on our frequency. Seo-jun, he can hear everything we've been saying since we got back. Every instruction he'd given, the sub-level room, the documentation poll, the defensive consolidation, all of it, heard in real time by the man who had built the protocols and who was apparently either trying to help them or executing the most elaborate misdirection Seo-jun had ever encountered. He pressed the transmit button. The service tunnel exits at the East Utility Gate. Your team knows the East Utility Gate. My team is not Han Jung-soo's team. Won-shik's voice remained unhurried. This was the maddening part. The absolute unhurriedness of it, as though they were discussing a schedule change rather than an active assault. 25 years in this organization, Seo-jun. I have never moved against you directly. Everything I have done, including what happened with Nia, which I am not asking you to forgive, was to keep this organization intact. Han Jung-soo has been waiting for this opening for 15 years, and I have spent 6 years managing his patience. Tonight, I could no longer manage it. Because she resurfaced. Because you brought her back. For the first time, something moved in Won-shik's voice. Not emotion exactly, but the faint temperature change of a man who has been holding something back. If she had stayed hidden for another 6 months, 4 months, I would have had enough on Han Jung-soo's financial structure to shut his operation down permanently. Every day she stayed hidden was a day closer to an ending that didn't require any of this. And then you walked onto that jet, and the entire architecture collapsed in 40 minutes. Seo-jun's jaw was so tight it ached. It was the cruelest possible geometry. The thing that had saved Nia, 3 years of careful disappearance, had also been the thing building toward Won-shik's exit. And the moment she was found, the moment he brought her home, he had pulled the pin on a device that had been diffused for years. He had done this. Not entirely. Won-shik had built the architecture. Won-shik had made the choices. Han Jung-soo had spent 15 years cultivating a weapon. But the timing, the catalyst, the specific trigger that had turned a managed situation into 20 armed men inside his perimeter. That had been him. 30 minutes, Won-shik said. Service tunnel. I will be at the exit point. Come alone or come with Hyun-woo. No more than 2. Bring the woman. Leave the documentation on whatever device she is using. Han Jung-soo's people will find it in the building, and it will buy you time because they'll think they have what they came for. Seo-jun looked at Dae-soo. Dae-soo's face in the red light was carefully unreadable. Then Dae-soo reached over to the console, pulled up a secondary screen, and turned it to face Seo-jun. It was a map. The service tunnel. The real route. The one Seo-jun himself had walked twice in emergency drills. Terminated not at the East Utility Gate, but in a secondary structure 40 meters beyond the east wall. If Won-shik's instructions were genuine, the exit point would be the secondary structure. If Won-shik was walking him into Han Jung-soo's hands, the exit point would be the East Utility Gate, which the South team would have covered. He said East Utility Gate, Dae-soo said quietly. The real tunnel doesn't come out there. I know. Which means either he misspoke or he's testing whether you know the difference. Or, Seo-jun thought, he's been on our frequency long enough that he knows we've been discussing the documentation poll. And this is an instruction for Han Jung-soo's people listening on the same bleed, telling them to watch the East Utility Gate while Won-shik actually walks us out somewhere else. Layers. 22 years of layers. His handset buzzed again. Nia. He answered it. The file transfer is at 60%, she said. Her voice had changed. Lower, faster, the voice of someone trying to be precise while afraid. There's a problem. The connection keeps breaking. Someone is running interference on the satellite uplink. Not cutting it. Intermittent disruption. It's been dropping every 40 seconds for the last 4 minutes. Can you complete it? If the pattern holds, I can push through in the windows between drops. But Seo-jun... She stopped. He heard her breath change. There's someone on the stairwell. The camera in the sub-level corridor. The one facing the 3rd step. Someone is on it who is not one of your guards. He was moving before she finished the sentence. The sound of weapons fire outside was constant now. rolling and overlapping, his people and Han Jung-soo's people exchanging positions across the grounds in the dark. He ran the corridor toward the sub-level stairwell with Hyun-woo 4 steps behind and his weapon in his hand, and somewhere below him, in a reinforced room with 4 monitors and a transfer at 60%. The only woman who held the complete documentation that could end all of the sub-level stairwell had 11 steps. Seojun knew this the way he knew the weight of his weapon and the distance from the operations room to the east corridor. Not because he had counted them deliberately, but because the body memorizes the geometry of the spaces it inhabits, especially the spaces it has thought about defending. 11 steps, a 90-degree landing, then a second flight of 8 into the sub-level corridor. The reinforced door at the end of that corridor was the last hard barrier between whatever was on that stairwell and Nia. He hit the top of the first flight at a run and stopped. One of his guards, the younger one, Park Junho, the man who had been on the jet, was sitting on the landing between the 2 flights, with his back against the wall and his hand pressed against his side. Not dead. Conscious, eyes up, tracking Seojun's arrival with the focused attention of someone working very hard to stay functional. The hand at his side was dark. "How many?" Seojun said. "1." Junho's voice was tight and effortful. "Came through the utility access at the end of the corridor. I got 1 shot in before—" He stopped, breathed. "He went through the door, sir. He went through." The reinforced door. Which meant whoever had come through the utility access had either had a key code or had brought something to defeat the lock. Both possibilities indicated the same thing. This was not improvised. This was a specific extraction with a specific target. Seojun looked at Hyun-woo. Hyun-woo was already moving past Junho down the second flight, weapon up, back to the wall, the practiced geometry of a man who has cleared rooms before and does not need to be told how. Seojun followed. The sub-level corridor was 8 meters long. The reinforced door at the end was open, standing open, not breached, which meant it had been opened from inside. The camera above the door was still active, its small red light steady in the dimness. Someone had opened that door. They moved down the corridor in sequence, Hyun-woo first, Seojun 4 steps behind covering the angle. At the open door, Hyun-woo stopped, back flat against the frame, and held up 1 fist. Wait. Through the open door came sounds, not fighting, voices. 1 voice, male, low, the cadence of someone talking to a person they want to keep calm. Then Nia's voice, 1 word, clipped and defiant, and Seojun was done waiting. He came through the door low and fast, Hyun-woo moving in the opposite angle simultaneously. The room, 4 monitors on the wall, 2 showing the grounds outside in infrared. The assault still active, still rolling, a firefight in 3 positions visible from the cameras, and 1 showing the file transfer interface, which was sitting at 78% with a blinking connection status. The 4th monitor had gone dark. Against the far wall, Nia, standing, not seated, which told him she had tried to move when the door opened. Her left arm was held at an angle that wasn't quite right, not broken, but restrained, a man's hand wrapped around her forearm, with the specific grip of someone who knows how to make it hurt if you try to pull away. He was holding her there without dramatic effort, the way a person holds a door open, because the effort wasn't the point. The man was approximately 50. Compact, well-maintained in the way that people who have stayed in physical condition past the age when most stop bother to. His other hand held a phone, screen lit, pointed at the transfer interface on the monitors in a way that suggested he had been in the process of photographing it when the door opened. Han Jung-soo. Seojun had never seen a photograph of him, but the quality of the stillness, the way the man absorbed the sudden entry of 2 armed men into the room and simply stopped moving without flinching, was the stillness of someone who had spent 15 years planning and had arrived at the moment the plan had always been building toward. He was not afraid. He was, if anything, interested. "Let go of her arm," Seojun said. His voice came out absolutely level. The levelness cost him something, but the cost was not visible. Han looked at him. Then he released Nia's arm. She moved immediately, not toward Seojun, but sideways, out of Han's radius, putting the corner of the monitor desk between herself and him. Smart. Creating geometry. Kang Seojun, Han said. Not surprised. not performing surprise. The tone of a man finally meeting someone he has studied exhaustively. You look like your father. That's been said before. Seojun held the weapon on Han's center mass. Hyun-woo had a second angle. The phone. Put it on the desk face down. Han did it. Slowly, deliberately, not a man being compliant, but a man choosing to cooperate because compliance at this moment serves him. The transfer, he said, glancing at the monitor. 78%. Wherever she's sending that, it won't matter. I've had 3 people in the Seoul Financial Regulatory Database for 4 years. Any documentation that surfaces through official channels will be managed. I'm not sending it to a regulatory database, Nia said. Her voice was steady. The arm she'd been holding at an angle was now held close to her body, not visibly damaged, but carefully positioned. I'm sending it to a journalist. Han looked at her, then back at Seojun. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not alarm, but the recalculation of a man updating a model. Which journalist? Someone who's been building a story on organized financial structures in Southeast Asia for 2 years and who has been waiting for a source with primary documentation. She paused. She doesn't need regulatory approval to publish. She needs the files. The transfer counter on the monitor ticked to 81%. Han Jung-soo looked at it. Then he did something that Seojun had not expected. He smiled. Small, not warm. The smile of someone acknowledging a move on a board. Your father's organization, he said to Seojun, took 47 fishing licenses, 3 port warehousing contracts, and 11 years of my family's coastline operation in one consolidation action. My father petitioned every legal channel available for 6 years. He died waiting for an answer. He paused. I did not petition. I planned. You're telling me this like it changes something, Seojun said. I'm telling you because you will spend the rest of your life trying to understand the architecture of what I built inside your organization, and I want you to have the beginning of an answer. Han's eyes were steady. What I fed one shik, information, patience, the impression of a manageable threat, bought me 6 years of access. 6 years of understanding exactly how your empire is structured, where the weight is and where the supports are thin. A pause. Tonight was not supposed to be a military operation. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet extraction of documentation and an exit. You accelerated the timeline by bringing her back. You keep telling me what I did, Sejun said, like you're waiting for me to feel responsible. I'm waiting, Han said, for you to make a rational decision. The men on your grounds tonight, they are not all loyal to me out of ideology. They are contracted. Call off the engagement. Let me walk out of this room, and I will stand down the contract team, and you will have a compound instead of a ruin by morning. 84%. Hyun-woo hadn't moved. Seojun hadn't moved. The sounds from outside had changed slightly. The sustained fire had broken into shorter, more intermittent exchanges, which meant either his men were pushing back or the assault was consolidating. Hyun-woo, Seojun said without taking his eyes off Han. What's the status on the grounds? Hyun-woo pressed his earpiece. A pause. North team is holding the main building entry. South breach has been slowed. Our people fell back to the interior garden wall and are holding. East is... Another pause. Longer. East entry is down. We lost 2 men. They're inside the East Wing corridor. Inside the building, East Wing, where Mrs. Seo and the household staff were in the safe rooms. Sojun felt something move in his chest. Not fear, but the specific cold weight of consequences that can't be undone. 2 men. Their names would come to him in a moment when he let it, and he would not let it yet because the moment he let it, he would stop being useful to anyone still alive. How long to reach this level through the East Wing, he said. 8 minutes, maybe 6 if they know the layout. Han knew the layout. Seojun looked at him. You have people who know where this room is. I have people, Han said simply. Then calling you a stand-down doesn't help me, Seojun said, because the team in the East Wing doesn't know the ground has changed until you contact them, and you contact them with the phone on that desk, which I am watching. 87%. Han shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. It was not the shift of a man preparing to move. It was the shift of a man who has just recognized that the room has a problem he did not account for. The phone on the desk was the only thing standing between him and uselessness in this negotiation, and it was currently face down under Seo Jun's sight line. The East team, Han said. They have one instruction. Clear the sublevel room, that's all. If there is no one in the sublevel room when they arrive, she's not leaving this room, Seo Jun said. Then we have a problem. We've had a problem for 15 years, Seo Jun said. You just brought it inside my house. Han looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the deliberateness of someone making a choice rather than being forced into one, he reached toward the desk, not toward the phone. Past it, toward the edge, the corner, where his fingers found the underside of the desk surface and came back with something small and dark that had been taped there. The placement practiced, the retrieval smooth. Hyun-woo fired. The shot was loud in the confined space, a single round, and Han's hand snapped back and the small dark object hit the floor and skittered. Not a weapon, a device. Roughly phone-sized but distinct, a secured transmitter, the kind that operates on a frequency separate from standard cellular. A dead man's switch or a direct line. Seo Jun didn't have time to determine which. Han was holding his hand. Not the expression of a man in shock, the flat, contained expression of a man absorbing pain as a logistics problem. The hand was bleeding, the shot had caught 2 fingers, and he was already reorganizing around the injury with the focus of someone who has decided that this specific body part is no longer the priority. The East team, Seo Jun said. Are they on a timer or on a signal? Han said nothing. Seo Jun crossed the room in 3 steps and picked up the transmitter from the floor. He turned it over. No display. Single button, currently untriggered. He looked at Han. Timer or signal? Silence. Seo Jun handed the transmitter to Nia without looking at her. Don't press it, and don't drop it. She took it. Her hands were steady. He noted this, filed it, and turned to Hyun-woo. I need 2 minutes alone with him. Hyun-woo looked at him, then at Han. Then he moved to the corridor and pulled the door to, not closed, not sealed, but far enough that the room had the geometry of a private space. Seo Jun looked at Han Jung-soo. He had spent years, most of his adult life, in rooms where the only thing standing between him and what he needed was another person's decision. He had learned over time that the tools available in such rooms were fewer than most people imagined, and simpler. Pain was a tool, but an imprecise one. It produced compliance, but not accuracy. And accuracy was what he needed. The more useful tool was simpler than pain. He crouched down in front of Han until they were at eye level. Han was sitting against the wall now. Not collapsed, positioned, the controlled positioning of a man managing blood loss with the efficiency of someone trained to do it. Your father petitioned for 6 years, Seo Jun said. You planned for 15. That's 21 years you've had this in you. He held Han's gaze. I am not my father. I know that is not information you care about right now, but I want you to hear it before the next thing I say, which is this. He paused. There are women and domestic staff in this building who have done nothing to your family. There are 2 of my men dead in the East Wing who were 24 and 31 years old and who had nothing to do with a port consolidation decision made before they were adults. Whatever this is between your family and mine, it does not belong on them. Han's jaw moved. Once. The micro-movement of a man exercising control over a face that wants to do something different. Timer or signal, Seo Jun said. Quiet. Just the 2 of them. Tell me which, and I will give you your phone and let you walk the East team out of my building before anything else happens. That is the only offer I have. The monitor behind him ticked. 93%. Han looked at him. The look of a man doing, in real time, the same calculation Seo Jun was doing. Not about this room, but about what came after. Whether the documentation that was currently at 93% and climbing would survive the next 6 minutes, or the next 6 months. Whether the architect of 15 years of planning could absorb the loss of one operation and continue building. Whether the man crouching in front of him was someone he could afford, long-term, to have as an enemy, or whether the more rational position was signal, Han said. Seo Jun held his gaze for 1 more second. Then he stood, crossed to the desk, and picked up Han's phone. He unlocked it. Han's right hand was functional, the injured fingers on his left, and held it in front of him. Han looked at the screen. Then he said 2 words quietly, in the direction of the phone. The radio on Hyunwoo's belt, audible through the door crack, changed frequency and crackled with voices speaking fast. Then stillness. "East team is withdrawing," Hyunwoo said through the door. His voice had the particular texture of confirmed disbelief. 96%. Seojun handed Han his phone. Then he stepped back and looked at the monitor and watched the counter tick upward and thought about the East Wing and the two names he was going to let himself think about in approximately 4 minutes when this was done. 98, 99. The transfer interface went green. And from somewhere above them, the main level, the East Corridor, the direction of the building's central structure, a sound arrived that was not weapons fire and was not footsteps. It was Won-shik's voice, coming through the building's internal intercom, which should not have been accessible from outside and which Won-shik had apparently had access to for approximately 22 years without anyone knowing. His voice filling the corridor and the room and the red-lit sublevel with the same measured, unhurried cadence that Seojun had grown up hearing, that he had trusted, that he had built decisions on for longer than he wanted to count. Seojun. A pause. Han Jung-soo's secondary team, the one he did not tell you about, entered through the north utility access 4 minutes ago. They are not contracted. They are his people, the ones who answer only to him. They are currently at the top of the sublevel stairwell. Another pause. I am at the bottom of the service tunnel exit. I have 3 men. Come now or don't come. But decide in the next 90 seconds, because after that the stairwell is not navigable. Seojun looked at Han. Han's expression had finally, for the first time since Seojun had entered the room, broken its composed surface. Not dramatically. A tightening around the jaw, a fractional widening around the eyes, the expression of a man whose contingency plan has just been exposed. The secondary team, Seojun said. Han said nothing. They're not here for the documentation. Seojun looked at him. They're here for her. Above them, through the ceiling, through 11 steps and a corridor and whatever was left of the building's north side, the sound of boots on concrete arrived like a verdict. Organized, deliberate, descending. Nia was already standing at the door. She had the transmitter in one hand and the handset in the other, and she was looking at him with the expression she'd had on the jet. The expression of a woman who has already run the calculation and arrived at an answer she doesn't like but accepts. "The tunnel," she said. He looked at Han one more time. At the man who had spent 15 years building an architecture designed to end everything Seojun had inherited, everything he'd built, the specific everything that was currently standing at the door holding a transmitter with steady hands. He made a decision. "Hyunwoo." He moved. "We're going to the tunnel. Bring him." A gesture at Han, not a concession, not mercy, but the cold calculation of a man who understood that Han Jung-soo, alive and in his custody, was worth considerably more than Han Jung-soo left in a room with a secondary team that had just been exposed. If he slows us down, the service tunnel smelled like concrete and old water, and the particular mineral cold of spaces that have never seen daylight. Seojun moved fast, one hand on the wall for orientation, the red emergency lighting from the sublevel already behind them and the tunnel ahead lit only by the narrow beam of Hyunwoo's tactical light. Nia was between them. Seojun in front, Hyunwoo behind with Han Jung-soo, and somewhere above and behind all of them, boots on concrete descending a stairwell toward a room that was now empty. The tunnel was 60 meters. Seojun had walked it twice in drills, and both times it had felt like nothing. At a controlled jog with weapons fire audible through the ceiling and a secondary team 40 seconds behind, 60 meters felt like a geography. He counted his steps without deciding to. Old habit, the body looking for control over something when the larger things were uncontrollable. At 32 steps, the tunnel bent slightly north. At 51, it began a shallow incline toward the exit structure. He heard Won-shik before he saw him. "Faster." Won-shik's voice from the end of the tunnel, direction rather than urgency, the voice of someone who has been monitoring the timeline. A thin band of light ahead. The exit door, partially open. The cold night air coming through and hitting Seojun's face after the sealed tunnel atmosphere like a physical thing. He came through the door. The secondary structure was a utility outbuilding, groundskeeping equipment, winter storage, the mundane infrastructure of a compound's maintenance operation. It had been cleared of equipment at some point, leaving bare concrete floor and four walls and two of Wanchik's men positioned at the outbuilding's exterior door, with weapons up and attention outward. Wanchik stood in the center of the space. He was 71 years old, and he looked at tonight in a way he usually didn't, the particular fatigue of a man who has been carrying something for a very long time and has finally set it down and discovered that setting it down doesn't feel the way he thought it would. He looked at Seo Jun, then at Naya, who came through the tunnel door and stopped and looked back at him with the expression of someone confronting the specific face of the person whose decision had cost them 3 years of their life. Nobody said anything for 2 seconds. Then Hyun-woo came through with Han Jung-soo, and Wanchik looked at Han the way two men who have spent 6 years in a managed deception look at each other when the management is over, without surprise, without drama, with the flat mutual recognition of a completed transaction. "The secondary team," Wanchik said to Han, "will reach the sub-level in approximately 2 minutes," Han said. His voice was still level. His injured hand was wrapped in the sleeve of his jacket, improvised pressure. "They won't find anyone. They'll clear the building," Wanchik said, "and when they don't find what they came for, they'll expand the search." "Then we should not be standing in a structure 40 meters from the building," Seo Jun said. They moved. Wanchik's vehicles were on the service road beyond the compound's east perimeter wall, a gap in the tree line that wasn't visible from any of the estate's camera positions, which Seo Jun noted without commenting on because the implications of how long Wanchik had known about that gap were not something he could productively address in the next 4 minutes. 2 vehicles. They loaded with the organized efficiency of people who have agreed to survive first and argue later. Seo Jun sat in the rear of the first vehicle with Nia on one side and Han Jung-soo on the other. Hyun-woo drove. Wanchik took the passenger seat and looked straight ahead as they pulled onto the service road without headlights, navigating by the gray pre-dawn visibility that was just beginning to differentiate the tree line from the sky. The compound receded behind them. Through the rear window, Seo Jun could see light, not the emergency red of his own systems, but the harsher tactical white of flashlights sweeping the east wing. Han's secondary team finding empty rooms, finding a sub-level monitor showing a completed file transfer and no one to take. He turned forward. Nobody spoke for 11 minutes. The vehicles moved through the dark toward a secondary location Wanchik had identified, a property in the outer district that had no registered connection to any Kang entity, purchased 3 years ago by a subsidiary of a subsidiary, the kind of blind acquisition that appears in Wanchik's meticulous ledger of contingencies. Seo Jun had not known about it. He was becoming progressively less surprised by what he had not known about. The property was a low building, commercial, neutral, the kind of place that stores inventory or houses a small logistics operation and attracts no particular attention. Inside, 4 rooms, 2 with cots, a kitchen, a secure communications setup that should not have been possible to install without the building's owner knowing, and a woman Seo Jun had never seen before sitting at the communications desk, who looked up when they entered, assessed the group's composition in approximately 3 seconds, and said to Wanchik, "The journalist confirmed receipt 40 minutes ago." "Eugene shit." Wanchik nodded. He looked at Naya. "I had a parallel send prepared, in case yours was interrupted." Nia looked at him. The expression on her face was not gratitude. It was not the opposite of gratitude either. It was something more complicated and more honest. The expression of someone receiving information that reorganizes a narrative they've been living inside for 3 years without resolving it into anything simple. "You could have told me that," she said, 3 years ago. "You could have told me you had a parallel operation." 3 years ago, I didn't know if you would hold," Wanchik said. "If Han's people found you, which they came close to, twice that I know of, I could not have your knowledge of the parallel and create a connection that burned it. So you let me carry it alone." "Yes." Nia held his gaze. Then she looked away at the wall, the flat concrete wall of a neutral room, and she breathed in the careful way she breathed when she was absorbing something she wasn't ready to speak about yet. Seo Jun watched her do it and did not fill the silence. He turned to Han Jung-soo. Han was sitting in a chair that Wanchik's third man had placed in the center of the room with a specificity that was not about comfort. His injured hand was now properly wrapped with material from a first aid kit. Someone had seen to it in the vehicle, professional and impersonal. He looked at Seo Jun with the same quality of attention he'd had from the beginning. Undiminished. the attention of a man who has not yet finished calculating. The documentation is published, Seo-jun said, or it will be within the news cycle. The financial structure, the transfers, the shell architecture. It's in the hands of someone who has been building a story around it for 2 years and now has primary sourcing. He paused. The contracted team on my grounds tonight. When it's daylight and there's no operation to run, they scatter. That's the nature of contracted work. He pulled a chair close and sat. What you have left is whatever you personally hold. Personal assets, personal loyalty from the people who aren't contracted, and whatever political cover you've built in the regulatory space. A pause. Tell me what that looks like, and we determine together what happens next. Han looked at him. You want to negotiate. I want to understand the full architecture of what you built inside my organization before I decide how to dismantle it. Dismantling it wrong creates instability. Instability creates openings for the next person with a 15-year grievance. Seo-jun held his gaze. I am not my father. I have said that once tonight, and I will not make a habit of saying it. But the Incheon consolidation, the specific decision that started this, I have reviewed it. It was brutal, and it was disproportionate, and the legal channels your father used should have produced a different outcome. A pause. They didn't. I can't change that. What I can determine is whether the next 20 years look like the last 15. Han was very still. You shot my man on the jet, Seo-jun said. You put teams on my grounds. 2 of my people are dead. He said it evenly. The evenness cost the most of anything he'd said all night. Those facts don't negotiate. You will answer for them in the way that I determine. But the information you carry about what's inside my organization, the 6 years of intelligence, that has value. How it gets used is a decision you can participate in or not. A long silence. Then Han said, the 3 regulatory contacts. I can give you names and the specific decisions they managed. All 3. All 3. Seo-jun looked at him for another moment. Then he stood and walked away from the chair and across the room to where Nia was standing near the wall. He stood beside her, not touching, looking at the same concrete wall she was looking at. Are you hurt? He said. My arm's bruised. A pause. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. She turned her head to look at him. In the flat overhead light of the utility room, she looked exhausted and precise and exactly like herself. Not the person she'd been in the 14 months of their marriage. Not the person she'd been in the uniform on the jet, but something that had been formed by all of it and had come through the other side still standing. Still standing. He had to look at that for a moment. I don't know yet, she said. Honest. The word landing the way she'd always let honest things land, without cushion. I've been operating on adrenaline and survival for 3 years, and I just watched you negotiate with the man who blew up our life, and I don't know yet what I feel about any of it. That's fair. I'm not asking for fair. She looked back at the wall. I'm telling you what's true. They stood in silence for a while. Around them, the room operated. One cheek speaking quietly to his communications person, Hyun-woo standing at the door with his particular quality of watchful stillness. Han sitting in the center chair in a posture that had gradually become less performatively composed and more simply tired. Seo-jun thought about the compound, about the 2 men in the East Wing, about the specific way the night had assembled itself from a broken glass on a private jet into this, a utility room in the outer district at 4 in the morning with everyone who had shaped the last 3 years of his life sitting within 30 feet of each other. He thought about the 14 months before any of this, about the particular ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind of morning he could not have described in any detail and could not now stop carrying, when she had been there and everything had been simply itself, unremarkable and complete. The thing about loss, he had come to understand, was that it did not announce its magnitude at the moment it happened. It announced it gradually, over months and years, in accumulation, in every ordinary moment that occurred inside the absence, piling up like sediment until the weight of the ordinary was the most unbearable thing. He was not a man who said things like this out loud. He didn't say it now, but he stood beside her, and he felt it, completely, for the first time since the jet. The specific weight of 3 years of ordinary moments that had happened in the wrong places and were not recoverable. The weight of that, and the fact that she was still here to stand beside. The pre-dawn light, when it came slowly. By the time actual daylight reached the building's single high window, Won-shik had made 12 calls, 3 of which Seo-jun had listened to directly. The contracted team had dispersed from the estate grounds before sunrise, which was not surprising. Contracted men understood that daylight and a failed operation were incompatible conditions for continued presence. The estate itself was damaged in the east wing, the gatehouse was gone, and the north garden wall would need structural assessment. These were problems with known solutions, and Seo-jun had people who handled problems with known solutions. The 2 men who had died in the east wing had names. Lee Chanmin, 24, had been with the security detail for 8 months. Kim Soo-hyun, 31, had been with Seo-jun for 4 years, had a younger sister in Daejeon, had asked for a schedule adjustment 3 weeks ago to attend her graduation and been given it. Seo-jun sat with those facts in the only way he knew how to sit with them, not moving on from them, not resolving them into abstraction, but simply holding them with the weight they deserved until the holding was finished. Hyunwoo watched him do this without comment. It was one of the things Seo-jun valued about Hyunwoo, had always valued, the man's understanding of when silence was the correct action. At 7 in the morning, Won-shik asked to speak to Seo-jun alone. They stood outside the building's rear exit in the cold, the city audible in the distance, the sky the particular thin blue of autumn morning. Won-shik looked older in daylight. Not fragile, he was not a fragile man, and the overnight had not made him one, but marked in the way that people are marked by the conclusions of long things. "What I did," Won-shik said, "with Nia, the decision to silence rather than come to you." He paused, not gathering words. Won-shik always had words. Gathering will. "I have explained the operational logic. I believe the operational logic was sound. I also know that operational logic is not the same as being right." He looked at Seo-jun directly. "I made a choice about what you could handle, and I should not have made that choice for you. You were not your father, and I treated you like someone who needed the same management." A pause. "That is the error I cannot explain away." Seo-jun looked at him for a long time, at the face he had known since he was 20 years old, at the man who had stood at his father's right hand and then at his, who had built systems and managed threats and made decisions inside those systems, and that management that had been, in the final accounting, decisions about Seo-jun's life made without Seo-jun's knowledge. "I'm not forgiving you today," Seo-jun said. "I'm not asking for today. The Han organization, whatever remains of it after the documentation publishes, the regulatory contacts, the financial structures, the internal intelligence he fed you, all of it gets delivered to Daesu over the next 72 hours, completely. Nothing managed, nothing curated." He held Won-shik's gaze. "And then you step back from active operations. Not exile, not punishment, not yet. That conversation happens later when I've had time to think clearly. But you step back." Won-shik absorbed this. Then he nodded once. Small, not performative. The nod of a man accepting terms he knew were coming, and had decided, in whatever interior space held his decisions, to accept. They went back inside. The weeks that followed were not clean. Clean was a fiction that belonged to other kinds of stories. What actually happened was work. Painstaking, exhausting, often inglorious work, the kind that doesn't generate dramatic moments, but constitutes the actual texture of consequence management. The journalist's story published 11 days after the transfer completed. It ran across 3 outlets simultaneously, which was how Nia had arranged it. One in Seoul, one in Hong Kong, one in London, covering different jurisdictions with different legal shields, making suppression geometrically harder. The financial documentation, the shell architecture, the pattern of transfers correlated to operational decisions inside a major Korean conglomerate. It was the kind of story that generates a particular quality of institutional discomfort, the controlled panic of people in glass-walled buildings trying to determine which version of the story served them best. 2 of the 3 regulatory contacts Won-shik's 3 men moved against them quietly, which was the nature of people who have spent years managing their exposure. They folded inward when the pressure came, protecting themselves first and everyone else as an afterthought. The third attempted to create distance through a counter-narrative that lasted 4 days before the documentation made it untenable. Han Jung-soo spent those weeks in a condition that was technically voluntary cooperation and practically custody. Seojun had resources that made the distinction academic. He delivered what he had promised: names, structures, the complete architecture of 6 years of intelligence work conducted inside the Kang organization. It took 11 sessions across 17 days, and it was, in Daesu's assessment, comprehensive. What Seo Jun did with Han Jung-soo after the 17th session was a decision he made in a room alone, without witnesses. And the outcome was a man on a plane to somewhere that was not Korea, with an understanding clearly communicated of the specific consequences of return. It was not justice. Seo Jun did not call it justice. Lee Chun-min and Kim Soo-hyun remained dead regardless of the outcome of 11 sessions in a controlled room, and no architecture of consequence restores what is permanently removed. He sat with that too. He would sit with it for a long time. Won Cheek stepped back from active operations. He was still present, in the peripheral way that 22 years of presence doesn't simply evacuate. There were questions that only he could answer, structures that only he fully understood. The institutional memory of a man who had been inside an organization's walls longer than most of the current personnel had been adults. Seo Jun used that knowledge and kept the distance and understood that the larger reckoning was still ahead, somewhere in the future, and that rushing it would make it wrong. Nia stayed. This was not a simple decision, and she did not make it simply. There were weeks of conversations that were not comfortable and arguments that did not resolve cleanly, and silences that were different from the silences they'd had before, carrying different freight. She had been a specific person before she disappeared, and she was a different specific person now, and the gap between those two versions was not closed by returning to the same rooms. They were not starting over. They were doing something harder, starting from where they actually were, which was not a beginning. She kept the consulting work she'd rebuilt under her own name. She declined the formal role in Seo Jun's corporate structure that he offered twice, and she turned down twice without lengthy explanation, which he eventually accepted the way you accept facts that are inconvenient but structurally sound. She was not an accessory to his empire and had never agreed to be one, and 3 years of living entirely inside her own decisions had made that clarity, if anything, more precise. What they had instead was something less architecturally defined and more honestly themselves. Mornings in the East Wing sitting room that had been repaired after the attack, the garden visible again through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city in the distance, arguments about things that mattered and things that didn't matter, and the productive friction of two people who had always been capable of making each other think. The specific quality of an evening in which nothing particular happened, dinner, a disagreement about something minor, the ordinary accumulation of shared hours, and Seo Jun understanding with the clarity that only the extended loss of something produces, that this was the thing, this ordinary weight. This was what he had been carrying the absence of. 6 months after the night on the jet, they drove south. Seo Jun owned a property on the coast below Busan, a villa set back from the water, purchased years ago as a private holding and used perhaps 4 times since, never for long. It had a terrace facing the ocean and rooms that the late October light came through at an angle that turned everything briefly golden in the late afternoon. They had been there 3 days, which was the longest Seo Jun had been away from Seoul's operational gravity in years, and the world had not ended, which he noted without quite knowing how to process it. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of afternoon that arrives in autumn on the Korean coast with the specific softness of a season preparing to end. The air cooler than the light suggested, the ocean moving in the patient way of water that has no deadline, the sound of it constant and indifferent and somehow steadying. Nia came out to the terrace where he was sitting with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She sat in the chair beside him and looked at the water for a moment. Then she looked at him. He looked back. He knew her face well enough to read the specific geometry of what she was about to say before she said it. The slight elevation of her chin, the way her hands settled in her lap with a deliberateness that was not her resting state. Something she had been preparing, something that required the particular quality of stillness she brought to things that mattered. "I'm pregnant," she said. The ocean moved. The late light crossed the terrace and caught the surface of the water and broke into the 1,000 ordinary pieces that light makes when it meets something larger than itself. Kang Seo-jun, who had spoken in boardrooms and issued orders in burning buildings, and sat across from men who intended to kill him and held his voice level through all of it, sat with his cold cup of coffee and said nothing for a long moment. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. and it was all arriving simultaneously, and the man he was had not built adequate infrastructure for this specific kind of arriving. He set the cup down. He looked at his wife, at the woman who had stood in a private jet in a borrowed uniform with broken glass at her feet and 3 years of survival in her eyes, at the person who had been the one structural fact of his interior life for so long that her absence had been indistinguishable from a kind of permanent weather, at the particular way she was looking at him now, not performing, not managing, just looking, with the same quality of real attention she had always given him, and that he had never, in all the years of his adult life, received from anyone else in the same way. He reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand. She let him, turned her hand over in his and let him hold it, her thumb moving once across his knuckles in the way she'd always done. A small gesture, almost unconscious, the kind that belongs to people who have known each other long enough that the small gestures are the language of the real things. He thought about Lee Chan-min, 24, about Kim Soo-hyun and his sister's graduation, about the weight of the ordinary moments that pile up inside absence until the absence is all you can feel, about the specific morning, the unremarkable Tuesday he could not describe, when everything had simply been itself. He thought about what it meant to have built an empire on the foundation of what his father had built, which had been built on foundations older than that, and how far down those foundations went, and what they had cost, and whether anything growing from that ground could come out clean. He did not think it could. He thought it came out what it was, marked by where it grew, carrying the soil it came from, and that what you did with what you were was its own question, separate and ongoing. He looked at the ocean. The sun was moving toward the water now, doing the slow, inevitable thing that suns do when they've decided a day is finished, throwing the long gold light across the surface until the surface held it and the world was briefly, without merit or announcement, beautiful. He had not cried since his father's funeral. He was not crying now, precisely, but something in his chest was doing something that was adjacent to it, the structural give of a man who has been holding a shape for a very long time and has encountered something that makes the shape unnecessary. He kept hold of her hand. "Okay," he said. One word. Not small. The largest thing he knew how to say in this language, in this moment, with this light on the water and this woman beside him, and the specific future that was beginning without asking his permission. "Okay." Nia looked at him. Something in her face. Something that had lived there since the jet, since the compound, since 3 years of careful disappearance, eased, not resolved into happiness, which was not her register and had never been, but eased, the way a held breath eases when you finally trust the air enough to let it go. They sat on the terrace as the sun went the rest of the way down, and the ocean turned the color of deep water, and the light left the way it always leaves, not all at once, but gradually, in the way that things that are actually ending end. The war was done. The empire stood, changed, marked by what it had survived. The man who had built his life around control had arrived, by the longest route available, at the one thing that does not negotiate with control, the plain and unmanageable fact of a future he had not engineered. He held her hand in the dark, and the ocean made its sound, and the night came in from the water the way night comes, not as an ending, but as the thing that follows one, the ordinary and unheroic and quietly essential dark, in which things continue.